Next, I would like to ask on the stage a man who probably doesn't need an introduction at all. He is the man who is the heart of Magento when it comes to community. He is the man, Mr. Air Miles. He's the man who's probably traveling around about 300 days in a year to educate Magento community around the world. And of course, it is Ben Marks from Magento. Please. Ben, if I may ask you a question.
Wait, we didn't rehearse this.
No, we didn't. How many days a year do you spend up in the air?
Up in the air? I don't know. I actually probably don't count out of just the interest of my own sanity, although it was a couple years ago, I was looking at my hotel stays for the year, and I was trying to figure out, I knew I was gone more than that, and my wife pointed out that I'd actually literally slept on planes for over a month that year. Like I'd been flying through the air like overnight that many times.
Do you sometimes have a feeling that you kind of miss out and live in the past, or is that more of the planes that take you in the future, and that's why you're talking about the future of the e-commerce today?
Did you ever see the movie Up?
Of course.
Okay. So, you know, well, we were talking about this last night, the golden retriever, right? Squirrel! That's me. I squirrel hard because I guess I do kind of live in the moment, and for me, life is just a series of moments. So yeah, I miss out on some of the things back home, but my charter in this world is a lot different than I think the traditional office job. So it means I get to go from one event to the next and figure out what's going on, and then the only thing I ever have to do is put that information back into the company.
Perfect. The stage is yours.
All right, thank you, Mars. We actually literally had no idea this was coming, so hopefully that made sense. Good morning, meet Magento Baltics. As they said, the first time here in the Baltics. I'm happy to be back with the Scandiweb team. They did an amazing job with the Ecom 360 event that was here earlier this year, right? They all kind of run together. It's great, it gives me a chance to practice my Russian with taxi drivers. It's about as good as you think. Zdravia. And let's see, this is the presentation. Oh, this is the presentation I'm doing today. The future of the Magento ecosystem. I feel like we should all just gather in a huddle, start a fire, tell some tales. I get that you're here because you care about Magento. I'm here because I care about Magento. And this is my chance to inform my friendly tech people in the back that the clickers, there we go. This is my chance to hopefully give some clarity, give some reassurance, give you some ideas about where I think things are going in the future. But in case you don't know who I am, like why does this guy get to be on stage talking about the future of Magento? We're going to spend just, I have 26 minutes left, 25 minutes talking about my backstory. I'll stay over here. Or, there we go. I have spent billions of dollars, no. The story is all about Magento, right? Billions of dollars flow through Magento code bases every year. I personally have traveled millions of miles in the air, something I'm sure I will have to explain to my grandchildren, if and when they come along. Going around speaking with our Magento ecosystem. If you're ever wondering what the Magento ecosystem is, well, you're looking at it. It's actually, it's everything. It's the worldwide phenomenon that is Magento. It's also everyone in this room. So it's worldwide, it's local, it's regional, it's by vertical. It's whatever you want to make it because it's really something that belongs to all of us. I'm actually not really going to talk much about my story because my story is just one of many, many stories. How many people have been in the Magento business for more than 1 year? Raise your hand, please. Yeah, it's a good chunk of you. I have had the pleasure, I will tell one little story. Back in 2008, if you were at Ecom 360, you might have heard a little bit of this. Back in 2008, when I went to work for a guy, he was starting a little company called Blue Acorn, and I was his first hire, so I was employee number 1, and I knew what I was doing. Like, I had managed a custom Zen framework app. I could do Magento. I know this stuff, man. It's going to be easy. So I told him it would take 2 weeks to build our first customer site. And then about 2 months later, we actually launched the site. Fortunately, pretty much broke even in terms of what he had to pay me to get that out the door. Some absolutely gnarly, terrible JavaScript hacks to like move things around on the screen because I couldn't figure out layout XML. The only reason I was able to even get anything done within 2 months was because I found some people on IRC, you know, like it's like the original instant messenger, and we were in a chat room, Magento chat room on Freenode. It's still there to this day, and that's where I met people like Alan Storm, VNI Kopp, and some others who explained things to me, and I met lots of other characters in there. You fast forward a decade, and a lot of these people are still around. These people have, they have entire lives that they've paid for, they have businesses that they've built, and that story is repeated all over the Magento ecosystem. Whether you're a merchant that's relied on Magento, or you're a developer who maybe started out on his or her own and built a business, whether it could be technology related, like a technology vendor, maybe selling extensions, providing customer service. I hear some people are even in the hosting business in the Magento world. Anyway, what happens because of Magento is nothing short of kind of a miracle. I was on a hike with the guy who hired me to work for Magento 5 years ago, a guy by the name of Roy Rubin, and he was one of the co-founders of the company that created Magento. And I asked him the question, just kind of figured I'd get his thoughts on it. I asked him, you know, did you set out to do this? Like what was your thinking when you were creating Magento? I was like, did you really think all of this would happen? And I mean, without hesitation, Roy is a warm guy. He's direct, but without hesitation, he looked at me and said, yes. I set out to change the world of e-commerce because back in 2005, 2006, the balance of power, if you wanted to have serious e-commerce, was in these massive e-commerce solutions or these really insufficient, fairly green open source solutions. There was no in between. And he knew that if he could build a community, build the right product, that those two would combine and they would actually shift the balance of power to the workforce. They would shift the balance of power to the merchants to provide the kind of experience that they were envisioning, to provide the kind of features that they knew would separate them from their competitors. And it worked. Where we are today, I have numbers. I don't have any pie charts, but I have numbers. Well over 100,000 online stores. How many? BuiltWith has some good data on it, but the answer is we don't totally know, right? Because it's open source. People take our software and they can use it without ever telling us about it. Well over 100,000 ecosystem members. This is a number that I wish I knew. I mean, I feel like I should be connecting with every person involved with Magento personally, but I can't. But we know it's big. We know it's big because we keep showing up places, and lots of people show up to talk about Magento. I was just at MageConf. Especially if you're technical at all, make sure you go to MageConf next year. Happens in Kiev, Ukraine, and there were over 600 developers there. I was blown away. As I mentioned before, billions of dollars a year flow through code bases around the Magento ecosystem. These aren't bragging numbers, these are actual numbers. We hire very smart analysts who are paid to get things right, not paid to make things look good. And this is roughly the number that we feel is flowing through Codebase every year. And more importantly, to me and to the people in this room, that's a $5 billion service economy per year, as in $5 billion is spent servicing the needs of the Magento ecosystem each year. If you think about it, Magento extracts a very small amount of the value from that ecosystem. Almost the entire value, that $5 billion amount, stays within the ecosystem itself. Those two numbers together, the 150 and the 5, they represent the phenomenal responsibility that we at Adobe, getting used to saying that we at Adobe have to each of you. When we do things right, we make things good for a lot of people. When we do things not so right, we stand to hurt people. And that's a big part of why I'm out here. You know, my job is to make sure that you all are informed, but mostly to make sure that we're listening, that we're paying attention, and that you, when you have a need, when you have something to celebrate, when you have something to complain about, that we hear it and that we can act on it. Now, in that spirit, in terms of engagement, we have over 50% of the new lines of code that are coming from the ecosystem. That is, these days, this is something new that's popped up in the last couple of years. Most of the code that we release is actually written not by someone that gets a paycheck from Adobe. Most of the code is coming from our ecosystem. This is probably the biggest open source development that we've had in our entire span, basically since the product was launched. This was actually the story of our transformation to a true open source company. I'll dig into that a little bit more, but I also wanted to point out that we, as far as our commitment goes, we invest millions of dollars into well, you all, because at the end of the day, everything we do, the software that we make, the services that we come up with, the marketing that goes on, none of it matters if we're not paying attention to you. Like, because at the end of the day, you take the software and you make it work for the merchants out there. And if you're a merchant in the room, you rely on that software and you rely on the technical know-how and ability of this ecosystem to realize what you want for your customers. So, here we go. Now, caveat. I have, I think, some pretty well-informed ideas about where things are going. But the challenge is that, you know, I do have to be careful about exactly what I say. So take all of this with a grain of salt. Legal disclaimer: do not make any stock-based decisions based on this, based on these musings. But I can tell you that I'm optimistic for where we're going, for everything that's changing, and all of the opportunities that are being created. So where I see Magento headed in the future is increasingly the balance of power goes into your hands. So I mentioned just a moment ago that 50% of the code base is written by you. I mean, why is that important? Some people will say, well, that's just Adobe getting free labor, right? For, you know, using open source. That is the case, but that's not really, it's not germane, right? I mean, at the end of the day, people are contributing to the code because they want to contribute to the code. And I'll tell you why that's important. When you have to do something with our code base, you probably want that to be as robust, that feature to be as robustly built as it can be. And if you're choosing Magento as a solution, you probably will need to customize several areas of the application. And the people that write the best code to satisfy both of those conditions are the ones who are actually working with it day in and day out. The example I like to use, although I'm going to have to update it soon because we're changing the architecture, something like totals calculation. You ever been through a checkout on any software, any commerce software? When you get to the cart, you see the totals broken out. You see like the tax amount, you see the shipping amount, you see the amount that's discounted, and then you see the total price. All of these things have their own, basically their own little circuit of logic that has to handle it. And then there's this architecture behind all of that, right? This is not something most consumers will think about, but it's very important. And when you have a software like Magento that's used all over the world, well, it becomes very challenging, right? Because over here, it works a certain way. But over here, you have to tax the shipping amount. And over here, if there's a discount amount, you actually have to tax the full price before the discount and add it, and various combinations thereof. So you can imagine that this gets really complicated really quickly. And if you look up GraphViz, GraphViz, and Magento and totals, just do a search, you will end up on a Stack Exchange post that has a beautiful graph of all of the complexity and priorities that go into totals calculation. It looks like someone ate black spaghetti and then threw up because of all the lines going everywhere. Now, when this system is built, like when this part of the application is built, who do you want building that? Someone who has an idea about computer science and wants to make things appropriate for computer science, or someone who's actually working with totals in the field and customizing this stuff day in and day out? I would like the latter myself. That's why it's important to have people who are experts in each little tiny domain that exists in the collection of domains that is an e-commerce app. It's important that they're the ones who are able to participate in the issue discussion. They're the ones participating in the architecture discussion. They're the ones saying, hey, you know what? There's an issue here. Either there's a bug, or I think we can build this better, and you know what? This will make my job easier. That's the important part about having power in the ecosystem. And for me, having power in the ecosystem also extends to the merchants. The merchant voice at the end of the day is the one that we have to pay the most attention to, because the merchants have to get their customers happy. So if we're paying attention, if we're making it possible for you all to do what you do better, quickly, faster, cheaper, then we're all going to win from that. So what I think is happening in the Adobe world is I see Adobe wanting to tell the story of Adobe Commerce. That's what Adobe has been working towards for years. Adobe has this very large organization inside of it. A lot of you know the Photoshop and Illustrator side, the creative side. There's a few sort of buckets of projects at Adobe. There's the Documents project, and then there's also digital experience. And this is the story of customer experience. This is really where commerce is headed. This is the story of understanding what customers are doing. Really understanding that this person over here, they first encountered your brand. Maybe they clicked on an ad. Maybe they ended up in a search of your website. And then we've all seen this happen. I look at something on my phone while I'm watching Game of Thrones one night, and then the next day, checking Facebook, there's that ad for that thing that I was looking at. So people have all these various touch points, and it's necessary. We have to have this kind of dripping nurture of customers in order to get them connected with our product. But it makes things incredibly difficult for the store owner, because you have to understand like how they're experiencing your brand. You have to understand how your marketing dollars are working or not. You need some insight about your customers in aggregate, like which customers were actually worth the spend. And a hint, one of the things that we knew from our MBI acquisition, that's our business intelligence acquisition a couple years ago, is that a lot of times the highest value customers are actually not the ones you should be spending the money on. You find out they're not actually the highest value for you as far as marketing goes. There's other places you can spend your money better and help your average order value and help your conversions overall, right? So this is kind of the mission of Adobe's digital experience arm, is giving merchants insight and power over this experience. And that experience, make no mistake, is the Adobe Commerce experience. And that is what Magento is a part of right now. And my expectation is, over time, we'll see the Adobe Commerce story evolve, and we'll see a change in how Magento is administered, and we'll see a change in how Magento is kind of present in this ecosystem. And because of those changes, well, in order for those changes to happen, I think Adobe is going to increasingly have to turn power over to the ecosystem. So that's what we've been laying the foundation for the last couple of years, and that's what I think we're going to be doing as time goes on. So your participation is not only greatly appreciated, it's absolutely necessary. If you are relatively new in the Magento ecosystem, or if you didn't have any idea, I have some handy slides for reference. We have our official community forums. We have our education arm. We have documentation. And then we have a couple of projects that I'll call out. And I realize this is a hot target environment here in the land of Scandi PWA. First, I'll call out community engineering and our presence on GitHub. How many people here are familiar with GitHub? So everyone else is probably a merchant, or maybe on the business side of the business. So GitHub is where we go. It's a social network with a coding problem, basically. And it's where we go to collaborate and come up with ideas and post, wicked hot memes about pull requests and things like that. Our presence on GitHub has evolved greatly over the last 5-6 years. We used to use it as just a file system for dumping our releases. Now we actually have full participation. If you're interested in anything about how Magento works, you can go there, you can see the issues, they're well groomed, you can go there, you can see what's being worked on, you can participate. So that's under the Magento 2 repository. We also have a couple of repositories that I want to call out because they're relatively new. One is called Backlog. Backlog is where you can see the kinds of things that we're thinking about from a product standpoint. You can comment on that. You can say, hey, this feature is important to me. You can make a suggestion. Hey, you know what? I really wish Magento did this. The other repository is architecture. The architecture repository actually represents the final step in our open source evolution. It is where our very, very smart architects have discussions with each other about the architecture. It's very exciting stuff. My wife and I read it every night. It's guaranteed go to sleep. And we gets my heart aflutter, but it is where you actually get to see how they're making the decisions that they're making, the justifications, the chain of conversation that led to a certain decision, but you also get to participate in the conversation. You actually can literally have a conversation with our architects and help shape the direction of where we go in the future. It also gives you that indication of the future. And the future is increasingly more microservice, serverless. This is where we're headed. This is where the world is headed, and this is where we're taking Magento. So I encourage you to check that out. We also have PWA Studio. PWA Studio is our idea, not just about PBA. It represents our collaboration with Google. We started, I think I was at one of the kickoff meetings at Google 2 or 3 years ago. We see that this is where the web is headed. And not just because Google does tend to want to run everything, but because the improvements for PWA as a technology really make the web fundamentally better. Make it faster, more efficient, a more seamless experience, especially when you're not somewhere that has really good mobile bandwidth. Exotic places like, you know, in the plains of Africa, in between the cities of India, or on the subway in New York, right? You ever been to New York? You go down the metro and you're like, I'm in a first world, you know, big city, and you get about 3 meters down the escalator or steps, and no more signal. PWA makes sure that all this stuff works seamlessly. And Google continues to write the RFCs that are changing what browser vendors implement. So things like being able to check out and have your browser know everything about you. Different vendors in this space, especially the payment vendors such as PayPal, they've solved this problem to a degree, but eventually your browser will know everything about you and will be able to sort of be your proxy in this digital world, like an avatar, and allow for these like offline experiences. And we know that this is going to happen because we've seen it happen to a large degree with WeChat in China. PWA Studio is our approach to how you build these experiences. Because as any developer can tell you, myself included, PWA is a different discipline entirely. It's a different stack entirely from building a server-rendered PHP application, right? You have to put a lot more thought into the design. You have to do this kind of bidirectional management of state, other things. And what it's meant for a lot of us PHP developers is we've realized, wow, oh, I guess I'm a JavaScript developer now as well. My good buddy Sander is here from the Vue Storefront project. I would encourage you to listen to him, and I'm pretty sure we have some Scandiweb PWA talks later. So all of us in this community, we're all taking different approaches to this PWA journey, but I encourage you to go to all of these talks because every bit of them, we're all working towards a common destination. Also, some more resources. A project I started several years ago, even before I joined Magento, a specific Q&A site on Stack Exchange. The Innovation Lab is where we highlight up-and-coming technology. Really interesting stuff that's not even a product yet, but basically if you bang a chatbot exotically somehow into Magento, we want to hear about it. If you've done a cool AR, VR experience, we want to hear about it. What we do with the applicants for each round is we select a few, and then we help you with PR, we help you with marketing, and we'll invite you out to trade shows so that you can actually be at the Magento booth with us, because we want to demonstrate to all the merchants out there just what's possible, just how much Magento tends to push the limits of what commerce is doing. I'm giving a little shout out as if you're interested in development at all. Mage2TV, my good buddy Vinay Kopp. I get no royalties from this. Good insight into the system. And then of course there's Twitter. If you want to get started with Magento on Twitter, this is where a lot of public conversations happen, in addition to various Slack channels. Just feel free to ping me and I'll give you some resources there. And I would be remiss in Europe to not mention Magento Live Europe, coming up in Amsterdam. Here, just a few weeks, my home away from home. It is always a good conference when Magento is responsible. And I'm really excited. This will be our first time in Amsterdam. We survived biblical floods in Barcelona recently. So, yeah, if you really want to get in touch with the Magento team, the Magento ecosystem in Europe, this is absolutely worth your time. And finally, my contact information. That's really my number. And that's me, probably about 5 kilos heavier, I think. My Twitter handle, my email address. I encourage each and every one of you to reach out to me. If you have any questions, any concerns, any ideas, it is literally my job to hear from you. And it is our job to make sure, as I said at the beginning, that we're communicating effectively with you. Back one more slide. 2 more slides. That was a new slide. This line right here, if you are interested in the future of Magento, Magento Association.org/membership/join. Please, if you are interested in the world of Magento, get involved. Membership is free. This is your voice in the world of Magento. And with that, I believe I'm out of time. So I will leave this up here for a moment. I will say thank you. I'll be back later with some panels. Please pay attention to our upcoming speakers, and I will be around for your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.